Hello, this is Christina
Lysandra Burgos.
and we are presenting our presentation on loss and grief with children.
So, what's loss and what's grief? So, first off, let's start with grief. Um, Loss is a part of something people can lose. Either it's something or someone. It could be a divorce. It could be a job. It could be material things. A lot of different things are what people would lose, would consider as loss. And grief is just a normal process of reacting to that loss. So, when it's something of physical, as a death, or social, as I mentioned, as a divorce or a job, and how people react to it with anger, guilt, anxiety, sadness, and despair. So the stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, they range from denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. So as you see, it kind of goes up and down and right back up. So the important information of the communication, emotional support, guidance, and direction. So denial, you have the avoidance, confusion, elation, shock and fear. Anger, you have the frustration, irritation, the anxiety, bargaining, struggling to find the meaning, and reaching out to others and telling one story. Depression, you're overwhelmed, helplessness, hostility, and the flight, and the acceptance, which is exploring the options, new plan in place, and moving forward with that loss and the grief. So grief, further explained, there's lots of different types of grief that we can go through. So there's normal grief, which is pretty much goes through with the first 6 to 2 years of a loss. Anticipatory grief, that grief is felt prior to the loss of someone you love, often to terminal illness. So I'm guessing this would be something that someone will go through when someone has cancer or some other form of illnesses. Delayed grief is exactly what it sounds like. It says there. So it's a connection with someone with divorce and loss. Complicated grief is also known for traumatic prolonged grief. And as a diagnosis you could receive from a medical doctor. Some experiences a complicated grief in the sense that you do not know the deceased very well, but nonetheless they have an impact of this loss. So seeing that as a strange father and speaking with in regards to this topic of children, I would think a lot of kids go through complicated grief. Disenfranchised grief occurs when the lack of social recognition. So a lot of pet owners have this. So this grief is common, and also time off of work and so on and so forth. They have chronic grief, which is complicated grief and very similar. In fact, it seems to be that chronic grief is that what folks get called complicated grief, because before complicated grief becomes into a hip term, if you can say the term of grief at hip at all. Distorted grief. Distorted grief was when someone was feeling, in the case of getting stuck in the anger stage of the stages of grief, and those who have distorted grief are angry at the world and others. You could say a lot of children, especially, I will probably go through this as well. Accumulative grief that's built up over time due to a number of losses, death, and life events. Prolonged grief, experienced about 10 to 20% of the bereaved and can be medically diagnosed. Prolonged grief impacts normal functioning as long-term effects in physical health. Exaggerated grief, exaggeration of normal grief process either through actions, words, mental health. Exaggerated grief may include major psychiatric disorders that develop following the loss of phobias and results of hyper grieving thoughts, actions, words, etc. Masked grief, excuse me, masked grief is in the person's experience. Grief does not say or have with a mask. It can be very common among men in in society and cultures in which these rules that dictate and how they act and how they appear following the loss of someone close to close to them. Traumatic grief occurs after an abrupt and unexpected loss. As mentioned, like terrorist attacks, car accidents, drownings, and so on. And I mean, traumatic grief, I'd say that's it can happen unexpected. Obviously, a lot of death is unexpected unless it was something like an illness where it was going to happen and you knew. Collective grief is a type of grieving experienced by communities and societies, most often talked about in regards to major celebrity deaths. So we see a lot of that in celebrities and in the news now, and so that's everywhere. Inhibited grief is when someone shows more signs of grieving, but not nearly to the level and intensity expected based on the relationship that has severed. Uh, there may be various of mass grief and delayed grief in these scenarios. Absent grief is defined as there being no grief to the aftermath of the death or loss of the important relationship. Many people who experience tons of anticipatory grief may have been the main caregivers of people who have experienced this type of grief. And then there's absent grief. It's defined as being no grief in the aftermath of death or loss of an important relationship. Many people who experience tons of anticipatory grief may have the main caregivers of experience of this type of grief. Yep. So how does grief and loss affect children? So in this, children who experience grief have extended periods of depression in which the children lose interest in daily activities and events, inability to sleep, loss of appetite, prolonged fear of being alone, acting much younger than an expected period, extraordinary intimidating of dead people, believe that they are talking or seeing to the deceased person, member of the extended period of time, repeated statements of wanting to join the dead person, withdrawal from friends, sharp drop in school performance, and refusal to attend school.
So here we're going to be doing a breakdown and have a descriptive breakdown of how grief affects children based on the age range. So how do toddlers from ages 0 to 2 grieve? So at this age, babies don't really understand the concept of death. So the way they respond to it is by the change of their environment. So they can experience a variety of feelings from abandonment, loss, insecurity of that person who's missing. That's the person that had passed. And they can also pick up on the distress around them, the distress around the environment that they're in. So some common reactions that you can see in babies from ages 0 to 2 are increased crying, irritability, clinginess, looking for the person that had passed, less interest in playing or eating food, and regression in previously reached milestones. And the ways that you can support your child is by holding and cuddling them, making sure you maintain the routine kind of the same. Also by keeping calm, as I mentioned, they can kind of pick up on the distress, speaking to them in a calmer tone and providing them with their favorite things like stuffies and their favorite blankets. How does grief affect children ages 3 to 4? So at this age, they still really struggle to even understand the concept of death. But at this age, they also start to develop an interest in death through, animals, and start to begin to form somewhat of an understanding of what death is. However, they find it hard to understand that death is a permanent thing. So some of the common reactions for this age range is crying, clinginess, and having fear, looking for the person who has died, having tantrums, showing lack of response, changes in their sleeping pattern or their eating habits, and some temporary regression as well. And some ways to support them is by, being upfront and answering any questions honestly and providing them with information, because at this age, they're still learning. Again, maintaining the routines, talk about those who will look after them, talk about the people who are there to support them and that love them and who are going to keep them safe. Support them with physical touch, give them hugs, hold their hands. Again, if they still like to be cuddled, you can cuddle them. Read them children's books about death. I think this is a great one. Over here on our left-hand side, you can see I have 3 books listed. One, Wherever You Are, The Invisible String, and The Goodbye Book. These are all great children's books that you can read with your child to educate them about death and grief. You would also want to use words to describe feelings. I also think validating their feelings is a great way of supporting, and also encouraging creative play and exercises as an outlet for coping. How do children from age 5 to 12 years old deal with grief? At this age is when they develop a more better of an understanding of death being permanent and irreversible. At this age, they worry about the person who has died, if they're feeling anything after passing, do they feel lonely, do they feel hungry? This is the piece where they still continue to have trouble understanding that once they have passed, that there's no feelings there. They begin to understand that death is, a natural part of life. And also they start to develop a curiosity of knowing what happens to that person who's passed. Where do they go after they die, or where they are? Some common reactions for this age range are they start to blame themselves for the person that passed. They start looking or sensing the person's presence around them. They can get easily distracted and at times become forgetful. They can, get increased anxiety for their own safety and for the safety of others. They start to suppress their emotions and to protect others around them. They will withdraw from usual activities that they would normally engage in, if refuse to attend school, complain about having physical pain in their bodies, start having and presenting some behavioral issues, and again, a change in maybe their sleep patterns, eating habits, and also temporary regression. Some ways to be able to support this age group is by providing reassurance of safety, maintaining routine and normal boundaries of expected behavior, validating their feelings, keep close with family and loved ones so they have those natural supports, listen to their thoughts and feelings and answer any questions they may have open and honestly. Talk about death as a normal part of life, include them in funeral planning, be creative, make a memory box for them around the person that had passed, or even a scrapbook, and also encourage self-care. Self-care is very important. How do teenagers 13 and up deal with grief? So at this age, teenagers pretty much have a good understanding that death is a natural part of life. Teenagers may want to, at this age, be with friends more or seek friends more than family for support when one has passed. And they may find the intensity of the emotions that they're feeling overwhelming and may have challenges expressing those feelings. So some of the common reaction for this age range would be difficulty concentrating, withdrawal, requesting some personal space. They may even act out, isolate from others. They may feel overwhelmed by the intense reactions such as guilt, anger, and fear. They can have some difficulty expressing their emotions. They can even suppress those emotions. Fear of their own safety and the safeties of others. Have questions about death and dying and spirituality. They may even use humor to kind of mask certain feelings that they're feeling, these big feelings. They may want to be closer to their friends. Some may still want to be close and want the support from their family members. They may even get into trouble, become defiant, engage in risky activities. So you could see a potential change in their behavior or engage in more risky activities. Also, they're eating and sleeping less than usual, maybe having some physical symptoms, again, pains in the body, temporary regression, and having notice a change in their relationship building skills, knowing that they're having strained relationships, and feelings of sadness, depression, and may potentially could even have suicidal thoughts. So the ways to support them is just being honest about what's happening. Again, talk about the death together. Listen and be available to answer any questions they may have. Validate their feelings. Let them know their feelings, are normal. If they're resistant to talk, leave helpful information for them around the house or wherever they usually hang out and things like that, so they can, read about it. Talk about grief and educate them how everyone grieves differently, so they're aware of that. Seek support and ask other adults to be available to check in with them to see if they're doing okay. Again, maintain some routines where possible. Praise and encourage them, and seek professional help if any other concerns arise. Why is it important to grieve? Though loss and grief can cause us emotional and physical pain, it can also bring us a deeper understanding of the true value and meaning of life. As for children, it allows them to experience personal growth as a result of their loss. Allowing children to share their thoughts and feelings can help normalize their experiences, as well as help them find ways to deal with their big feelings. So there is a Children's and Grief Awareness Day, which I thought was really nice. It's upcoming November 18th on 2021. And here was a little quote that I found online that I thought I could share. It says, by honoring Children's Grief Awareness Day, we create a world in which death and grieving is integrated into our lives as a normal life event in such a way that leads to greater compassion, hope, and growth. Absolutely beautiful. And here's another beautiful quote. Cry, it is okay to do so. Cry your soul out, even when there is nothing left to pour. Grieve freely. Understand that this is your process, and for growth, pain is essential. And that is our presentation to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.